Christ alone my hope is found. He is my light, my strength, my song, this cornerstone, this solid ground, firm through the fiercest drought and storm. What heights of love, what depths of peace, when fears are still, when striving cease. My comforter, my all in all, here in the love of Christ I stand.
In Christ alone. That's where we want to be found, not anywhere else, not adding man's version of things to it. In Christ alone. Thank you for taking a moment to think about the things that really matter, spiritual things. Say it with me, Psalm 118, verse 24, this is the day the Lord has made. We will rejoice and be glad in it. Remember Hebrews 3 and verse 13, but exhort one another daily, while it is called today, lest any of you be hardened through the deceitfulness of sin. God and water is our topic of discussion right now. As I said, this came about both as a way to discuss 1 Peter chapter 3, but also just to look at a history of how God uses water, how he created it, how he uses it both for the creation and the destruction of things, both for the reward and the punishment of things. So it's really an interesting study. I hope you've joined us through this entire series. And today I thought it would be a natural transition, since last time we talked about the Red Sea crossing and the cleansing of Naaman's leprosy. I thought that we ought to include in there also one that goes in between those, and that is in Exodus chapter 15, a place that's called Marah. Now, maybe Marah doesn't ring a bell with you or mean much to you, but if you'll look the word up, one place that you'll find it is in the little book of Ruth. And you might remember that when Ruth and when Naomi and her daughter-in-law Ruth journeyed into the city, and people began gathering around Naomi, they called her name, and she said, "Don't call me Naomi, call me Marah." The reason she said that was that she had lost her husband and she had lost her son. And so she was bitter of spirit. And so that word Marah means bitter. That's important to understand. So go back with me and remember the crossing of the Red Sea, the God bringing the Israelites out of Egyptian bondage. And let's pick up their story over in Exodus chapter 15 and remember how things went with them after leaving Egypt. It wasn't always a smooth ride. In fact, it got pretty bumpy at times. Let's take a look at that. So Exodus 15 and verse 22, so Moses brought Israel from the Red Sea. Then they went out into the wilderness of Shur, and they went 3 days in the wilderness and found no water. Now when they came to Marah, they could not drink the waters of Marah, for they were bitter. Therefore, the name of it was called Marah. Some of you may have a footnote like this. Marah literally means bitter. So it was called Marah. And the people complained against Moses, saying, "What shall we drink?" So he cried out to the Lord. So again, and most of us are familiar with the fact that, we can live a while without food. Probably some of us, like me, we could live a little longer without food. We should stay away from food a little more, but I like to eat. And there's been, cases of people going even weeks without eating. But now when it comes to water, We absolutely have to have water. You can die in hours, perhaps. I don't know. I've seen figures like 3 days is a very iffy situation going without water. So we really need to be close to water. And as the people left Egypt and crossed the Red Sea, here's one of the first stops, and it's at Marah. And you can imagine, with this enormous multitude of people, and you've got all these men, you've got their wives and their children, and all of this livestock. It takes an incredible amount of water to keep all of these people and animals hydrated. Well, they get there and there's water. What was that old saying? Water, water everywhere, and not a drop to drink. Well, that's exactly where they found themselves. Plenty of water. None of it was apparently potable or satisfactory to drink. And so they begin complaining. And as we'll see all through their history, that's what they do. When things don't go the way they like, or things don't go the way they anticipated, they start complaining and murmuring. They complain against Moses, their leader, and which is in reality complaining against God, because God chose Moses and God approves and wants the people to understand that Moses is his guy. That's who God has appointed to be the leader. So if you complain against God's appointed leader, then in reality, you're complaining against God. So let's look at what happens here at Marah. It says in verse 25, so he cried out to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a tree. When he cast it into the waters were made sweet. There he made a statute and an ordinance for them, and there he tested them and said, if you diligently heed the voice of the Lord your God and do what is right in his sight, give ear to his commandments and keep all his statutes, I will put none of the diseases on you which I brought on the Egyptians, for I am the Lord who heals you. I think there's some important lessons to be learned here. Here at Marah, some people have made a great deal of the tree. I didn't realize this till I started researching this a little bit, but some people think that the tree had some innate nature that made the water sweet. But first of all, even if it was something about the tree, God was the one that showed him the tree and told him what to do with it. But secondly, if there was something about the tree that could help the water, it would take some type of miraculous help to make it change that much water. How could one tree transform all of that water, enough water for the men, women, children, and animals to drink? It was miraculous. I don't care how you look at it. God was in control here. They couldn't drink the water because it was bitter, and God used the water to demonstrate his power once again, which should be fresh on their minds. I mean, after all, they had just witnessed all of these plagues in Egypt, the final one being the death of the firstborn. So, when they say, what shall we drink? God's answer is, here's a tree, throw it in the water. And the water was sweet. And they could have what they needed, which was water that would replenish them. And so it's interesting that it says that God made a statute and an ordinance there. Not that this really seems to be some new type of ordinance like the Ten Commandments, but he proved them. He tested the people of Israel by waters that were first bitter and then sweetened by the power of God. God gives them proof, and he gives them just a little sampling of how things would go after this. He says, if you do wrong, if you disobey, you can expect basically the bitter waters of affliction to follow you around. But if you are obedient and do what I say, things will be pleasant and good, like that cool taste of fresh, sweet water that you got after I showed you how to throw this tree in, and you obeyed me. It was the obedience and the faith that Moses was enjoining on the people, that God was commanding the people. It was the obedience and the faith of Moses in getting the tree and throwing it in the water that saved them potentially here, because they would have died without suitable water. So what water saved them, and God was the one that made the water suitable to save them. So God says, I want you to learn from this. If you do what I say, do what's right according to my commandments, things are going to go well, like drinking sweet water. But if you don't, he brings up the diseases. You remember the water turned to blood, all of those flies, lice, hail, the disease on the cattle, boils, all of those things that God brought upon the Egyptians. He brings those up to remind them, hey, I can bring these on you if you're disobedient. But God calls himself, let's go back over there and notice that. He made a statute and an ordinance for them in verse 25, and there he tested them. And verse 26, heed his voice, do his commandments. And what does he call himself? For I am the Lord who heals you. God heals when we are obedient to him. Another lesson learned via water. It's just amazing as you start going through and looking at all of these lessons that we pick up, and how God creates and destroys, how he blesses and he punishes, all with water. And in this case, he preserved their lives with water, but he also used the water to teach a lesson. It was one of those visual lessons. This was God's PowerPoint that far exceeds anything that man could ever come up with. Look at the tree, make the water sweet. And now as you think about that, think of how life will go for you when you're obedient for me, like a sweet drink of water. But also remember that bitter water, and that's the bitterness and frustration that you can expect if you try to live your life disobeying me. I tell you, there's some good lessons there for you and I today as we go out and try to live our lives in accordance with his will. Let's remember that if we try to buck against God, we're going to suffer those consequences. And maybe that water that's called Marah, and that name that Naomi asked to be called by, maybe we can remember that today as we go through the day and say, hey, I don't want anything to do with that. I want the sweet water that God promises to those who obey his will. God and water, a lot of good lessons to remember there. Well, want to remind you once again of our upcoming gospel meeting, October 2nd through the 7th. Please make a point to come and be with us. If you have questions about it, leave a comment or send us an email. We'll be glad to talk to you about it. That will be here at the meeting place of the Stone Ridge Church of Christ, 514 Airport Road. Regular times on Sunday, 10, 11, and 6, and Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Come and join us. We'll make sure that you are welcomed here as an honored guest. I guarantee it. Also, be sure and like the program and leave your comments. Send an email to me. My email is on the screen there. Or send an email to the church here, Stone Ridge Church of Christ at gmail.com. You got to give me a little slack, folks. I'm still making a transition here. Hey, until next time, if the Lord allows us the next time, I hope that you all have a great day. And remember, as you're going throughout this day, remember the ideas of sweet and bitter water and how God promises sweetness to the one who is obedient, and that there is always the threat of bitterness for those who try to be disobedient toward God.
No guilt in life, no fear in